You all to this exciting meeting on artificial intelligence and the evolutionary explanation of religion. We start with a short introduction. Well, this meeting, I would like to remember, is in the context of previous meetings, starting in 2014 with the geneticist Richard Dorbin from the University of Cambridge, continued with the presentations by Mark Thomas from University College London, evolutionary biologist, 1 year ago. And from these two guys, we have been taught about the recent results in evolutionary science, and we are relying on these results. The next meeting, on the other hand, the discussion on artificial intelligence and the ethical challenge. We had the meeting also in 2020 with Ilyas and Selma Kuke. And in January, we have started discussing the challenge by Yuval Harari in the book Sapiens and Homo Deus, because they are related to both, to evolution and to artificial intelligence. And today, we continue this discussion. If you want, we could say that the starting point is that if we acknowledge that God made humankind in the image of God, according to Genesis, since this moment, Sapiens is no longer a mere evolving biological species, but becomes a community of persons called to live and behave respecting each other according to moral rules and human rights. So we are challenged to answer the following questions. You have already read this in the program. We start now with the first one. Can Genesis be considered a fitting basis to defining the human person and human rights? So what is really a human person? What means really knowledge? This is the first question we address with the presentation by Dan. Please, Dan, go on.
Thank you very much, Antoine. Let's completely solve these questions in 10 minutes. That's my ambition.
Yes.
But no, let's try and see how far we get. You cannot yet see my screen, right? No, I have to share it. There
Not
we go.
yet.
Now?
Yes.
Great. So, being a human person. Well, thank you, Antoine, for this opportunity to speak to you all. I hope you're all awake while we kick this off. But let's dive straight in. Last time I introduced some ideas from Freedom in Quarantine, this book, and today I'm going to talk a bit more about being a human person. And so let's see where we get. If I understand correctly, then Harari wants us to kind of protect human beings. He wants to protect human beings from being taken over by data science and artificial intelligence. And to me, that seems actually like a very important objective and a very good thing for him to want to do. And the solution to this challenge, though, is to write a history book. So it's a book about the history of the human beings. And the answer I would like to give is different. The first, well, it's a bit of a different solution, which is to try to face reality and think about some really obvious things. Because as my friend and teacher Leonardo Polo says, the genius of philosophy consists in concentrating on the obvious. Because very often we don't think about the obvious, and that's where things go wrong. So let's think about some obvious things. a first obvious thing I would like you to think about is the fact that the concept of a dog doesn't breathe. Okay, so a dog breathes, right? But the concept of a dog, like the picture of this dog, doesn't breathe. Now, what does that say? It says that there's something in the reality of the dog that the concept and the picture refer to, but do not fully capture in themselves. Concepts don't breathe. That also means that they do not change with time. They do not age. I can change them, but the time itself does not affect them. For instance, if I have a mathematical formula with a lot of concepts in my head, just because I go to sleep and then wake up the next morning, the formula hasn't changed. I may, of course, have received additional inspiration, but that's something else. So the passing of time itself does not affect the formula. So concepts are outside of time. They are timeless. Right. So then we go to a second obvious thing. Building a house is a gradual process. While you're doing it, while you're doing the process is not complete, because else it would already be finished. On the other hand, concepts don't morph into one another. Rather, they replace one another. We go from one to the next. It's like seeing. We first see one thing, then the next thing. Now, there we see there are kind of two types of change. So one is the one of building a house. This is what Aristotle calls motion. Things that are, the things that kind of go from one thing to another state gradually, like building a house. Things that are instantaneously given, Aristotle calls acts, as is shown in this quote from Aristotle's Metaphysics. He says, but the same thing at the same time is seeing and has seen, is thinking and has thought. The latter kind of process then is what I mean by act. The former, so things like building a house and so on, is what I mean by motion. All right, so Aristotle makes an important distinction about motion, something that goes gradually, and an act, something that is instantly what it's supposed to be. That's a very, well, it's a very obvious thing on the one hand, but it's also a very important distinction. Now, Parmenides said, my Greek is not so great, so I'm not going to pronounce this, but knowing and being are the same. And he's onto something, because knowing, we've just seen, is an act, is something that is. It's not something gradual, it's something that just is our knowledge, our concepts. The same thing holds for being. Being also doesn't become, we just are. So for example, if we're playing a computer game, you see here a picture of The Sims. If the computer can either be turned on and you can play, then the game is, or it's turned off and you cannot play, the game is not. So being like that doesn't become, it just is, it's actual, right? So the computer is on or it is off. Okay, well, so this is, I've tried to introduce the concept of act. I've tried to see that it's something that's in knowledge. It's also something that's in being. Now, what Leonardo Polo suggests is that it's the same with human persons. Being a person is something actual. We actually are persons. Now, you can say, well, that sounds very obvious. Yes, we are persons. And that's a very simple idea, but it has a lot of consequences. So we actually are persons means that it's part of our act of being. That also means that God gives this act of being, because God sustains us in being. Therefore, we are fundamentally relational. We are children of God, not just because we like him or we are entering into some kind of friendly chatter with him, but it's in our being. It's who we are. So this is something very fundamental about us. Now, we can grow as persons, but if we grow, then we would grow from act to act. Like if we see something, we see one thing, then we see the next thing, then we see the next thing. It's not like building a house where you go from a set of stones to a house, a gradual process. Rather, it's one vision, then the other vision, then the other vision. And in this way, we would also have to grow from act to act by the grace of God. So if we want to grow as as persons, we need to grow like that. Every person has a radical newness because it comes from God, so which implies that we can freely coexist with others. We also have personal knowledge and personal love, and these things are given to us, so they're part of who we are. It also means that every free act, if it's really that radical that it comes from our being, means a certain newness given by God, which is bursting into history. So we really transcend history in this way, and our freedom transcends history in this way. All right, so these are a lot of things, and maybe I'm going too fast, but you can ask later. But my conclusion is this: not to get caught up in data science and artificial intelligence. We don't really need to run to history like Harari is doing. I mean, it's not that history is unimportant. Of course, we are people in history, but it's not the most fundamental question. It's really enough to reflect upon the obvious, to realize what we actually are and who we actually are, that are human. We are human persons. And questions about history are also relevant. They're interesting, but they're really of secondary importance. So let's not pretend that our whole life depends upon them, because our life is first of all rooted in God, who is keeping us in existence at this very moment. All right, so this are some preliminary reflections. If you want more where this came from, you already know where to look. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Dan. Excellent. You have, in less than 10 minutes, you have achieved to make this difficult.
There's nothing more to say now.
Okay. Well, then let us go to the next with Father Joe Evans, please.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak. It's lovely to be with you all here from Manchester. And I want to talk to you in these 10 minutes about knowing God through love, a beautiful topic. And thank you, Antoine, for asking me to speak about that. And I'm going to address it in two parts. Part one, love as a higher knowledge, and part two, love as our DNA. I'll explain both. Love as a higher knowledge. Science is often exalted as the true and most exact form of knowledge. But actually, if you think about it, you only truly know through love. Knowledge seeks to control. Love is ready to receive and to give. It's a better way of knowing. Purely scientific knowledge we could call knowledge for manipulation, knowledge to control, to make use of something. But a higher form of knowledge we could call knowledge of contemplation, which always has an aspect of grateful reception. You're receiving a gift, like when you look at a beautiful scenery or a beautiful person or a beautiful work of art. There's also a sense of receiving a gift and therefore of gratitude and wonder. Knowledge of contemplation necessarily involves an aspect of love, whereby the heart, mind, and soul are somehow transported to the other being. One goes out to the other being in wonder and delight, and one receives this gift gratefully. One receives the being, the other, gratefully. Of course, this is most seen in the ecstasy of love, but it's also seen in the contemplation of beauty in nature or art or music. I'd like to say that love is the true epistemology, the true way, the true philosophy. It's the true form of knowing. One only knows someone through love. In love, of course, you see the person's weakness. You know, who knows us best? Who's most aware of our weakness? Probably our mother, who knows us best. But she also knows our greatness and our potential and our dignity. And I think when you understand love a bit, the logic of love, you also understand that it has a different logic. A logic which we could call, which some of the popes have called, particularly Pope Benedict, gratuitousness. In other words, one just gives because one needs to. It's an inner need. It's just like a mum who just needs to give to her children, who needs to spoil her children. Likewise, love involves respecting the freedom of the other, their way of being, and not seeking to control them. Precisely, love is the opposite of knowledge for manipulation, the desire to control. Here's a lovely, so that gratuitousness of love. Here's a lovely quote from Pope Benedict in a document, surprisingly, on economics and social questions and business. But he says this: charity and truth places man before the astonishing experience of gift. Gratuitousness is present in our lives in many different forms, which often go unrecognized because of a purely consumerist and utilitarian view of life. And here's the most beautiful part of the quote. The human being is made for gift, which expresses and makes present his transcendent dimension. So the more we give, the more there's something transcendent, the more there's something godlike about us. Now God himself, not yet, go back. God himself reveals himself through love and for love. Creation is a great act of love. God telling us, I love you. Look what I've made for you. I think we men, I'm pleased to see there's men and women in the audience, obviously a mainly male audience. And I here just suggesting a word to us men, or a critical word to us men, that we men, males, here, particularly struggle with the notion of gratuitousness. You're just giving for the sake of giving. And likewise, so does the scientific, the technical worldview. That one can, that gratuitous again is the idea that that one can love and receive without an obvious logic of do ut des, that Latin phrase. I give so that you give to me. It's a rather selfish way, isn't it? I'd like to suggest that gratuitous love is very much part of the feminine psyche and something that we men need to learn ever more from women. If we could understand, perhaps understand is not the best word, if we could appreciate true love better, if we tried to love better, and here I'm speaking to a mainly Christian audience, I'd say if we ask God to give us the love we need to love him and others better, we might understand, or we might appreciate creation better. Creation as a splendid gift from God. So the more we try to love, the more we try to give, the more we'll appreciate creation as that great act of love, that great gift from God. Now let's jump to Jean-Luc Marion, who he's this guy who won the most recent Ratzinger Award, sort of a high prestigious theology award from the Vatican. He's written this very good book, God Without Being, or Dieu sans lettres. It's not for the faint-hearted, definitely not for the beginner. It's quite dense. But his basic idea is, as much as St. Thomas Aquinas is right, St. Thomas Aquinas, the great Catholic philosopher and theologian, very important, and Catholic theology really should be fundamentally follow Thomism, Thomist's ideas, at least the basic ones. So as much as Aquinas is right, we start with being and not knowledge. Reality is before we know it. Therefore, Descartes got it wrong. I think, therefore I am. That's, Descartes got it wrong. So Descartes puts knowledge first, as if somehow my knowledge creates reality. Of course it doesn't. My knowledge merely recognizes reality. Reality comes first. And therefore we must start, obviously, again, likewise, with the being of God. But the point is that Marion makes is that we can never fully know or express the being of God. To think that we know God's being is to create an idol. An idol is a God you can know and control, but you can never know and control God. And therefore, for Marion, a better approach is to begin with a sense of God's love, which is always beyond our control. Remember that God reveals himself as and for love. God is love, as we read in the first letter of St. John. His revelation is always excessive, beyond our control, and must be received with gratitude, wonder, and ecstasy. And of course, this is a very good attitude for a scientist. Part 2, love as our DNA. And here we go to the Bible, that wonderful line that God made us in his image, after his likeness. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. We are made in the image and likeness of God. And that later on, the next verse. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Just in these last couple of minutes, let's unpack that. First of all, image and likeness. Now, some church fathers, and then like St. Irenaeus in the 2nd century and later, followed by St. Thomas Aquinas, see image. And what is it, the difference between image and likeness? So images, they see it as our rational state, and likeness as our spiritual and moral state. So image continued after sin, that didn't change, but our likeness with God was damaged. And they argue that Christ came to restore our likeness. Now, the Catechism doesn't seem to make such a distinction, the Catechism of the Catholic Church. It says the vocation of humanity is to show forth the image of God and to be transformed into the image of the Father's only Son. So it doesn't seem to, it's all image, isn't it? But no, I think that's an open question, really. Now, Pope John Paul II, following Irenaeus, I'll leave you to guess if that's the picture's Pope John Paul II or Irenaeus, you can work it out yourself. Pope John Paul II, following Irenaeus, taught that the image of God is also in our body. Here's a lovely quote from Saint Irenaeus. He says, he's explaining the idea that the soul and the spirit do not make the whole man. We're not angels, we're not just soul and spirit, but it needs also the admixture of that fleshly nature, which was molded after the image of God, after in the sense of according to, following. So that fleshly nature, which was molded after the image of God. So we are in the image of God, both in our rational powers, but also mysteriously in our bodily nature. As male and female, we are in the image of God. Just as Adam mysteriously contained Eve within him, she came from his body. So Adam with Eve, in some way, came from God in his, from the God's own nature. That so male and female somehow come out of God. We are also in the image and likeness of God in our communion and union with us. God is Trinity. God is a relationship. He lives a life of love with the Holy Spirit and the Son. The Holy Spirit is the bond of love between the Father and the Son. And therefore, the more we love, the more we have this bond of love with others, the more we share in divine life. Love is our very DNA. And the very love within God's own life led him to create us, to love us. He made us out of and with love. He breathed his love into us. As I say, love is our DNA. So let's conclude. Love is, as I said, love is the best way to know anything, but especially to know God, because God is love. We are made in the image and likeness of God, who is love. And so we are most fully ourselves and most like God when we love. And therefore, no, Descartes was wrong. It's not I think, therefore I am, but it's I am, therefore I can love. Because I exist as a rational being, I can love. But likewise, that love most makes me be. I most fulfill myself. I love, therefore I am, and therefore we are. It creates community. And we could say that love is the greatest science. The more we love anyone, the more we are human and the more we are divine. And the better we know the world, which was made by divine love for us. Love is the greatest science. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellent, excellent. And I think the two presentations, Dan's and Father Joe, complement very well each other. It is, we are highlighting the obvious thing that we are persons and that we are called to love. And so we come now to another aspect, probably, the aspect by Jean-David Ponci, who will present you something which could rather support the idea, or he will ask, are we like animals?
Okay, thank you, Antoine.
Okay.
So I have prepared a small video, small movie, and I give you already the conclusion of this small video, that the conclusion is that from a moral point of view, animals are unfinished humans. Here you have Frank de Waal, which is the big expert of animals. He has worked always with chimps.
Pillars of morality. If you ask anyone what is morality based on, these are the two factors that always come out. One is reciprocity, and associated with it is a sense of justice and a sense of fairness. And the other one is empathy and compassion. And human morality is more than this. But if you would remove these two pillars, there would be not much remaining, I think. And so they're absolutely essential. So let me give you a few examples here. This is a very old video from the Turkish Primate Center where they train chimpanzees to cooperate. So this is already about 100 years ago that we were doing experiments on cooperation. And what you have here is two young chimpanzees who have a box, and the box is too heavy for one chimp to pull in. And of course, there's food on the box, otherwise they wouldn't be pulling so hard. And so they're bringing in the box. And you can see that they're synchronized. You can see that they work together. They pull at the same moment. It's already a big advance over many other animals who wouldn't be able to do that. And now you're going to get a more interesting picture, because now one of the two chimps has been fed. So one of the two is not really interested in the task anymore. Now look at what happens at the very end of this. He takes basically everything. So there are two interesting parts about this. One is that the chimp on the right has a full understanding he needs the partner, so full understanding of the need for cooperation. The second one is that the partner is willing to work even though he's not interested in the food. Why would that be? Well, that probably has to do with reciprocity. There's actually a lot of evidence in primates and other animals that they return favors, and so he will get a return favor at some point in the future.
So reciprocity was the first pillar. Now I give you an example of empathy and compassion among animals.
But Mozu cannot travel through the trees. She must crawl through the deep snow on her elbows and knees.
That's the important point, that unlike most humans, the chimps don't pass the, cannot counteract their emotions. You will see that.
Okay, sit in that chair. All right, here's the deal. Marshmallow for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have two. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? All right. I'm gonna go do something and then I'll come back.
It smells yummy. Oh, it smells really good.
So here you have the big difference between humans and animals. So humans, we have will and intelligence to counteract our emotions and to choose what to do. Thanks for your attention.
Yes.
Finished.
Well, thank you very much, Jan David. So this is a challenge to discuss, are we different from animals or not? Or can we attribute morality to animals? Now, please, Nico.
Hi, everyone. Good to see all of you here.
So, excellent.
You can hear me well and see my screen?
Yes, all perfect.
Perfect.
Can go.
Just a second. All right. Welcome to my talk about the love of God, his creation, and implications for humankind. My name is Nikolai. I'm currently a PhD student in Zurich. And yeah, so we already heard a little bit about love. And well, it's a very big thing where all of us know that it's an important concept for all of us. Yet it is kind of difficult to grasp. And for the purpose of this talk, I want to start with a small image. Let's take this couple. They're thinking of getting a baby or getting a new car. Let's say they decide to get a new car. And then they realize that it's maybe not as fast as they wanted it to have. Well, they could try to work on it, or if it doesn't work out for them, just sell it or even trash it. Maybe they also find out soon that it uses a lot of fuel. It's expensive. And well, they can also try to change that. Or also they could see that the car is not giving them the social status that they wanted it to give them. And yeah, they could come up with the same solutions. Now let's say this couple received a newborn. And soon they might begin to realize maybe it's not as beautiful as they wanted it to be. Or they also see that it's super hungry and yeah, kind of putting some financial burden on the couple. And also it might be that the new member of the family puts them in a difficult social situation. So what are the solutions to kind of seemingly the same challenges that this baby gave them? And I hope when I say, is it the solutions that you can see on the left hand, that there's a rapid no emerging in all of your minds. So why is that? I would argue that the relation to a car is based on the function that the car has, while our relation to the baby is or should be based on love. Now, how does that relate to the different, let's say, images of humanity? One of them being established by Harari, as we saw in our previous seminar back in January, where he, for example, says that humans are they are self-created. They just came into existence by evolution. And most importantly, they are more and more able to control that process and create themselves. Why are we doing what we are doing? Well, according to Harari, that's not because of our free will, but because of the components that we consist of, or in other terms, our biochemistry. Our biochemistry and our, well, let's say, components are not perfect. So we are weak, and that renders us kind of lost. She says that we don't know what aims we should set ourselves, or in other words, what are we actually doing here on Earth? Still, we are also quite needy. All of us are looking for happiness, for peace, prosperity, and so on. And well, good news. Harari says that because we are becoming more and more intelligent and advanced in science, we might be able to create technology that gives us all of these. Concluding his statements, he says that we are self-made gods. We can continuously create ourselves, and we are just reliant on the laws of science, creating this image of a functionality-based technoism. Now let's have a look at the image that is brought forward by Christianity. As we already heard in a previous talk, it is said in the book of Genesis that we are created by God in the image of God because of his love. And that love also entails trust. This is one of the questions that was one of the headlines of our seminar today, that because of this love, God gave us the responsibility to take care, thus creating the free will, which enables us to be responsible for what we are doing. Still, I like the similarity also to what Harari said. Yes, we are weak. And in the book of John, it is said that everyone who says he is without flaws, without mistakes, he would be totally mistaken. But he brings that a little bit further, saying that because of it, we have to seek forgiveness and try to better ourselves because of it. And yes, we are needy. Each of us, I would say, feels this need for something out there. And I say, Blaise Pascal put this really nice, saying that this big need can only be filled by something great as the love of God. So concluding, yes, we are looking for something, we are weak, and our heart will only rest in God himself. Maybe this seems a little bit abstract, so I just came up with a few simple examples how that comes into effect in our daily lives. Let's imagine we are in a marriage, but our spouse might not live the life with us that we wished for. If now, that would be totally functionality based. And I would say, sadly, this is increasingly the case, we would get divorced and look for someone else. While love enables us to accept the situation and be patient. Now, in another example, we would see that, for example, unborn babies or elderly people are not really functioning anymore the way that it would serve humanity. And well, yes, this is super sad, but you would agree with me that it's also true that we increasingly kill these people. While also here, if we would establish a relation of love, we would instead welcome everyone and care for them. Lastly, something maybe not that extreme, but super common is that many people have this materialistic, trait-based view of life, that they only get what they deserve and what they work for. I would say this is the most important part when it comes to the increasing amounts of depression or burnout, because no, we cannot deserve what we get. But instead, knowing the relation of God being based on love, we just need to be increasingly grateful for this. I think someone who can put this in even better words than I did is the Pope Francis in Lumen Fidei, where he said, at the heart of the biblical faith is God's love. His concrete concern for every person and his plan of salvation, which embraces all of humanity and all creation, culminating in the incarnation, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. This is kind of the Christian view, and the following paragraph is relating to the image that Harari brought forward, that without insight into these realities, there is simply no criterion for discerning what makes human life precious and unique. Man loses his place in the universe, he's cast adrift in nature, either renouncing his proper moral responsibility or as presuming to be a sort of absolute judge, like Homo Deus, endowed with an unlimited power to manipulate the world around him. I would like to end my talk with my personal favorite quote from the book of Corinthians. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I'm nothing. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nico, for this presentation. Then we have now some time for discussion, and Alphonsas Jursenas has asked a question to Father Joe. Please, Alphonsas. Alphonsas?
So
yes.
My question was, how would you respond to a position that love is an emergent phenomenon? For example, love could happen at the level of humans. Humans could be assumed to be constructed from cells and cells from atoms and so on. And therefore, if it is an emergent phenomenon, if this assumption is correct, then it could not be treated as fundamental. It seems to be a problem here. So how would you respond to this position?
Father Joe, please.
I'm happy also for a philosopher or somebody else to chip in, but afterwards. But my response, I think it's a good question. It's a question.
Sorry, we cannot hear you.
You can't. Can you hear me? Can people hear me?
Yes, yes, we hear you.
Okay, good. Alfonso, you're very quiet, so maybe you need to turn up your volume or something. Right. I think one of the presentation about us and animals begins to answer the question. I mean, we are clearly higher than animals. We achieve greater forms of love, who have the same levels, or at times higher levels of physicality than we do. You know, I mean, monkeys and gorillas can swing and do all sorts of things that we can't do. I think we come back to the basic argument, you know, are we merely physical, or is there a spiritual dimension to us too? Traditional philosophy, going back to the Greeks, has always posited a non-spiritual aspect. And there is evidence, rational evidence, that physicality doesn't explain everything. In many ways, love has to be more than material. Love is limited by materiality. Philosophy has always shown that spiritual beings are possible and are, rationally speaking, more powerful, and therefore can achieve a greater level of love. We're also seeing that the more we try to create ourselves, the more we get it wrong. So there's something in us that, simply our own rationality, our own sort of level doesn't solve. And the last idea I'd say is that the one organization that is speaking up for love is the one that does point to a spiritual being. The Catholic Church again and again points to love, demands love. The idea that we can explain everything by cells doesn't work. It doesn't lead to love. It just seems in many ways that it leads to a lack of ethical sense, a sense of manipulation. And that would be I don't think it's a great answer, but I'd be very happy for others to chip in and to see what they would say to that. Please, Sam.
Well, thank you. I have no other questions. I have no more questions in the chat channel.
There are, I think, Sam wants to say something. He said, may I give a short response?
Okay, please, Sam.
Yes, I think people often think emergence is some kind of magical property that solves issues like these. But for example, if you look at a physicalist ontology, wetness of water isn't really playing a role there. It's some statistical quantity because we have macroscopic eyes, ears, and feelings. So it's an average value of all these fundamental quantities. But that means they're fundamentally observer-dependent quantities. They're not truly there. And so if you think love is emergent, it's always with respect to what observer. And so if you truly believe in a physicalist complete description of reality, and you want love in there, you need something outside of that reality. So you don't really avoid the issue. Like, I think emergence in physicalism is not really a viable route, at least as far as I can see. I think it's often just misunderstanding that a lot of these things we think are emergent are just idiosyncrasies of the fact that we are pretty big physical systems and not something fundamental to the ontology itself.
I think Alfred had a question for me.
Yes, please.
Alfred, do you want to ask your question or should I read it?
Alfred has a question. Yes. Alfred, please.
We can't hear you.
Yeah, yes, now you can hear probably.
Yeah.
I have a question. How can you explain the characteristics of a person without direct reference to God? I ask this question because many people are not believers in God, or at least their belief is not so strong, and would be interesting to give a good definition or explain what is characteristic for a person, and why are animals not persons in that sense?
Well,
thank you, Alfred. So, well, to me, I mean, I think philosophy is all about being open to reality. And I think the first thing we need to do is to open people up to reality. Of course, our knowledge tends to help us to get to know reality better, but there's also a sense in which our knowledge can kind of close us in. So if we're completely caught up by our theoretical models, then we may not be open to the full richness of experience that we have, or at least not kind of have a dialogue between our experience and what we have in our heads. So I think the big challenge is to help people to really, well, as I said, consider the obvious things, and that can be just talking about, so what is your experience of relationships? How does it make you feel if someone betrays you, for example? Now that may not fit in to a, so that can give you a lot of hints as to what it means to be a person who is a fundamentally relational entity. But then, and then reflecting upon these very obvious things, it seems to me that we get a bit closer to what it means to be a person in full reality. But in the end, I think, reality will also lead us towards God.
Thank you. Here we have Sam want to give a short response and also a question to Dan. Please, Sam.
Well, my response was given already to Alfonso's, but to Dan, I was wondering, isn't history also very important for us to know God? Because if I don't know what happened in the past. I need other people to keep that knowledge alive. And so history does seem to play an important role, at least in my personal relation to God, and that's how I get to know him.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. I think absolutely. So history is important. I think in my last slide, I've also said that was important, but still that the importance was secondary, and that the importance that doesn't mean that it's unimportant, but it means that there's something even before that, which means that and the primary thing is, I think, the actuality, the fact that we are now. I think also in our relationship with God, of course, history, reading about the Bible, things that happened, the tradition of the church, all these things are going to help us a lot in getting to know God, and they are important. But still, it's primary that, first of all, we exist. Second of all, that God gives us the grace to understand these things, and that we have a personal living relationship with Jesus Christ now. So these things, to me, seem to have, the love that Father Joe talks about is something that happens here and now as well. And history is integrated into that dynamic. And so, yes, that's its importance, but I still think it's secondary. And that's also a reaction to at least how I see Harari, and maybe I'm not completely correct, but Harari seems to kind of put history at the first, you know, like the most defining characteristics of who we are as human beings. And I think that's not correct.
Father Joe, you have a comment to Sam?
Just that, and I'll add a second one. So I mean, I think I agree with Sam and Dan. Basically, I think you're both right. But I think history is perhaps a bit more important than Dan says. I think if we don't learn from history, we risk making the same mistakes. And as I say, you know, we are now, but we are also our past. I think, no offense, Dan, but to say that we're just now is very much a philosopher's approach.
I didn't say that. Huh? I didn't say that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for correcting. But I think this is most seen in God, who is eternal present, in a sense, past, present, and future all at once. So I think we are also our past, but also I agree with you, basically. I agree with you with that nuance.
No,
okay, please.
Yeah, can I just respond, because so I really liked your talk, Father Joe. So I just wanted to say that, and also in response to John David. So it seems to me that what Father Joe is saying is that our love goes a little bit beyond only our will and our reason. So it's something even deeper that we have, and that we do not that we have in common with animals. So I agree very much that love is a way of knowing that is also very personal. So it's something that really comes from who we are. And again, also, I mean, who we are is also expressed in our history, in the adventure of our lives, and all that is integrated into one whole. I completely agree with that. So, yeah.
Okay. So thank you. We have to move to the next presentation and to the next question we address in this meeting. Is artificial intelligence replacing humanity, or has AI to truly serve humanity? I think here Ilyas Khan and Anna Pearson from Cambridge Quantum Computing, which is sponsoring this meeting, and I am very thankful to Ilyas for having agreed to share with us his thoughts. So even with quantum computers, with improved artificial intelligence, should artificial intelligence rather truly serve humankind? Thanks, Ilyas, for answering the question.
I think I'm going to be just as successful as Dan was in answering this question in 10 minutes. Well, first of all, Anna is going to be in charge of the slides, so I hope everybody can see them. I also want to thank you, Antoine, for the consistent energy and passion you have for this series of talks. I have to say that the limitations of not being in a room together this morning at least are overcome. I'm so engaged, and I have so much to say on all the things, but I'm going to be disciplined and focus on my little bit. I also want just to say something about the magic of your curatorship, Antoine. You know, each of us think, oh, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, what can we say? But of course, it's the entirety of the experience that really matters. So I want to pay homage and acknowledge the thought that you've put into this session, and the curating of it, and the gentle way in which you've encouraged us all. And if you could just go to the next slide, please. In the middle of February, there was an op-ed published in Scientific American, a journal that many of you, or a magazine that many of you will be familiar with. And it was an op-ed that I had written. And this op-ed really came at a time when the debate about whether quantum computers were merely a different type of AI, or whether there was something fundamentally different in the challenge posed by this type of technology, raised more and more questions. And of course, the whole issue of the impact of artificial intelligence, particularly computability, goes back a very long time. One could say that Kurt Gödel's, I would say, the most important development in logic, which was Kurt Kurt Gödel's work in the early 30s that was published, which effectively said that, you know, truths cannot be proven in the system in which they're articulated. There are many ways of describing what Gödel did, but that's just one. But starting with Gödel and going through to Turing and then Penrose and many, many others, this is a question which we have obsessed, whether we're Christians, whether we're unbelievers, believers. We live in this world and we obsess with these issues. Many of us focus only on how can we get richer by using these things. And I mean richer in monetary terms. Others are focused on how can we use this to get some sort of satisfaction in our lives. But the contention that I have and we have is that quantum computers are different. This is something fundamentally different. If you look at the sweep of mankind and the way in which technologies have been adopted and the challenges that they have had, and we need only look back to 1945 and the Manhattan Project and Oppenheimer's violent reaction to waking up to seeing the power of the atomic bomb, what he had created. You know, we're on the cusp of something which is truly going to change humankind. And if we do not take a more active approach today, then we will not have served our children. I love what Father Joe said. I'm from Manchester, Father Joe, so I really was inspired by that. But I wanted to kick off this because this is actually a presentation by Anna, and I'm going to introduce her in a second. Some of you may have seen this book by Mariano Fazio. It's a very, very beautiful book, by the way. And I was inspired by this when Antoine told me that we have to do this 10 minutes. He says that these are the main challenges of today that we want to change by means of our impact as committed Christians: individualism, hedonism, relativism, and a deep, widespread social crisis. We can say that what is at stake in today's culture is truth regarding the human person. Is truth regarding the human person, is there in fact such a thing as truth? Is there a human nature to guide our conduct? Can we change the prevailing anti-humanist culture that suffocates the transcendent yearnings of the human person? So can we do something to change this? Now, we don't need a PhD and we don't need to be a gazillionaire to understand the life around us and the crisis that we face. I have 2 children, and I spend my life worrying about the impact on them of basically doing this all the time. Right? And this is a very powerful image. We sometimes we laugh, but the crisis afflicting this generation is very real, because this becomes their reality. And if we think this is pervasive, quantum computers are an exponentially more impactful technology. The ability to create beings, the ability for machines to understand nuance. You know, Father Joe said something earlier, which was fantastic. You know, gorillas can do many things we can't. They can break branches that we can't. Well, computers can do many things that we can't, but there are many things they cannot do. And that boundary is very porous if we don't stand up. When I say we, I don't just mean human beings. I say we, committed Christians. There is a role for us to play before it's too late. In the mid-90s, we were asleep at the wheel. We cannot let that happen again. Now, this is my conviction. This presentation, however, is not my presentation. It's Anna's presentation. Now, she's a very, very, very brilliant young person. She's a PhD from Oxford. She works in the quantum computing business. She's just had a fantastic paper published in Physical Review, which is APS. There's very little I can say about Anna that will do justice to her intellectual brilliance, but she's going to try and encapsulate some of these points, and I'm going to come back at the end and then just finish off with a couple of minutes. So over to you, Anna.
Okay, thank you, Ilyas. Can you all hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Well.
So based on Ilyas's article in Scientific American, Antoine has posed this question. Can we manage that the presently developing AI, in particular quantum computers, will truly serve humanity? And then leading on from this question, it made me think, and how does this relate to human beings being in the image of God? Well, in order to survive, human beings have had to master the use of tools. We have a very long history of making use of them, back to simple constructions of a pointy thing on the end of a stick in order to kill an animal to get food, right the way through becoming more and more complex to our present day computers, which do thousands of processes for us every day. And computers have greatly changed the world, as Ilyas was talking about, and AI is vastly changing the world we live in. But as Ilyas mentioned, quantum computers are on track to create the next revolution. So, firstly, what is a quantum computer? Why is it so special? Well, the fundamental difference between a quantum computer and your classical computer that you're using right now to watch this seminar on is that a quantum computer makes use of qubits, quantum bits, rather than bits. Now, a classical bit can be a 0 or a 1, but a qubit can be both at the same time. It can be in what's called a superposition. So a superposition is when something is in more than one state at the same time. Other key aspects of quantum mechanics, which are different to classical physics, is the idea of interference, where amplitudes can add together to increase or cancel out, and entanglement, where the sum of the constituent parts of a system does not suffice to describe the system as a whole. Or to put it in more striking terms, in an entangled system, a change in one part of the system will immediately affect the other entangled state, no matter the separation between the two parts. Other things specific to quantum physics, which are also worth mentioning, is that the theory is fundamentally probabilistic. If something is in a superposition, it is impossible to tell which state it will collapse to when you measure it. You can only predict with a certain probability what state it will land in. Another interesting thing is that quantum information can't be cloned due to the no cloning theorem. So this makes quantum information very, very different to classical information. And then some people claim, and this is, I say some people because in quantum theory, there's a whole host of interpretations and there's no consensus as to the correct philosophical interpretation of the theory. But some people say that the theory is inherently random. It's not just apparent, but at its fundamental core, it's random. And so to summarize, the quantum world is a very, very different world to the everyday one of our classical experience. And harnessing the strangeness of this world will certainly open up new avenues of discovery. And so just briefly, to physically implement a quantum computer, you can use a huge number of different physical systems. So two popular ones are superconducting systems, which this is a picture of the inside of a superconductor. Well, the quantum processor is the tiny little thing in the middle, but all the wires are the microwave wires that you need to access it, of a superconducting processor, or you can use ion traps, which don't need to be cooled down. You can use spin qubits, photons. There's a whole host of different physical systems you can use. And then, well, you're probably asking, well, why do we want to go to all this effort? Well, I think Feynman sums it up very nicely, where he said, nature isn't classical. If you want to make a simulation of nature, you'd better make it quantum mechanical. And by golly, it's a wonderful problem because it doesn't look so easy. And so aside from just the motivation that if nature is quantum mechanical, we want to simulate it, there's a whole host of advantages. So because quantum information can't be copied, you can make very secure cryptography with it. You can do chemistry simulations, much easier and much more complicated simulations with quantum computers. This can be used for materials discovery, for example, to make better batteries or carbon capture, the list goes on. Drug discovery, I mean, we're living in a pandemic, we all know how important drug discovery is. And quantum AI is set to be more powerful than classical AI. And this is just a few of the advantages, but as with anything, with the advantages come challenges. And perhaps one of the most worrying challenges is that we will have a greater inequality between those who have and those who do not have with this complex, powerful tool. Because quantum computers can perform far more powerful calculations, our current data will not be secure, so we need to move to different ways of encrypting our current data. It will open up doors to more extensive DNA manipulation. These new materials that can be discovered, well, maybe some of them might be used for war. That's not such a good thing. And AI, although it can be used for good, can also be used for bad, and it may become more intrusive. So we need to think through these challenges and more challenges that aren't named here seriously before it's too late, And so how does all of this link to theology? Quantum mechanics, quantum computers, does it have anything to do with theology? Well, if we look at Genesis, God said to humankind to fill the earth and subdue it. And if we think of Feynman, nature is quantum mechanical, well, I wish to propose that subduing the earth, and I don't mean exploiting, I mean using the earth to fulfill our needs whilst taking care of the earth, having a good dominion over the earth. Part of this is understanding it, understanding the world that God gave us to live in. And if quantum computers help us understand the world that we live in, I think by creating them, by using them, we are fulfilling the mandate to subdue the earth that God gave us. But I slightly disagree that science is just knowledge to be used. For me, science is an act of worship. So in Psalm 111, it says, "Great are the works of the Lord, they are pondered by all who delight in them." Yes, knowledge can be applied, but knowledge can also increase our awe of the Creator. As it says in Romans, God's eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made. So by studying the world, by studying creation, we are delving into God's eternal power and divine nature, not simply for the use of it, but for the awe it inspires us in us as we learn more about the works of God. And so, thinking of being in the image of God, we know that God has perfect understanding. Now, it's my opinion, and you're allowed to disagree with me, but I think that part of being in the image of God is to seek to understand the world around us. Kepler said he was thinking God's thoughts after him. So when we study and when we try to find out about God's creation, we're trying to think the thoughts that he thought. And as I've already said, I think study and research of science, I think science as a whole can be approached as an act of worship. And I think taking it even a bit further, I think it can be a vocation to be a scientist. So I'm a scientist and I feel it's my vocation. I think God wants me to do science. A bit like, I don't know if you know Eric Liddell, when I run, I feel God's pleasure. For me, it's like when I do science, I feel God's pleasure. And so to wrap up, thinking about human beings, it might sound obvious, but quantum computers, quantum AI, they will never be human beings. No matter how scary they get, we are separate. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. So it's not our ability to learn that sets us apart from machines. Right now, people are teaching machines to learn, and machines can learn and do certain tasks a lot more efficiently and a lot faster than a human being. It is not our ability to learn that makes us in the image of God. It's something God has bestowed upon us. We live in him, he lives in us, and we are his offspring. We are invited to be part of his family, a privilege not extended to machines, however clever they may become. And over to Ilyas.
Thank you, Anna. I don't want to embarrass you. I told everybody she's brilliant. She really is a brilliant person. So I'm surrounded by brilliant people at Cambridge Quantum. Cambridge Quantum is without question the leading quantum computing company in the world. And we have an obligation, I think, because Anna and her team are working on something called quantum natural language processing. And it is clear to me that before the decade is over, quantum computers will manifest themselves in one area at least where there will be virtually no ability for us to distinguish between a communication with a quantum computer and another human being. In another part of what we do, we're looking at a cure for Alzheimer's. It will be found. For the same reasons it can be found, for the same reasons that artificial intelligence will allow us to have true meaning-aware and grammar-aware language processing, which, by the way, has never happened up until now. Other forces will be unleashed within this decade. In fact, probably within the next 3 to 4 years. We cannot sleepwalk into this. So my focus at my company, which I run, is that we can be different. We can show there's a different way, a Christian way. We can be responsible for what we do and make that responsibility part of our mission. And I really am very grateful to Antoine and all of you for giving us a few moments to listen to this. There are 3 aspects to this that I hope you'll take away. The first is that quantum computing is not just another technology. Please don't make the mistake of thinking it's yet another powerful computer. Secondly, that we cannot just throw up our hands. It is part of our mission, God's mission given to us. Some of us are brilliant in the science, others of us have different parts of the mission. And we have to make sure that we are at the center of this debate. This is our time as Christians to be at the center of this debate. And thirdly, if nothing else, I'll leave you with this. You're all familiar with Pope Francis's comments here on relativism. But if you look at the bottom, the last sentence, there is a logic in all this whereby different attitudes can feed on one another, leading to environmental degradation and social decay. He refers, of course, to this idea that it's just another development. All things are relative to what happened before, and we put human beings at the center. Well, of course, if human beings are made in the image of God, which is our faith, this is what we believe, then relativism has no place in our judgments. And so my article that was in Scientific American, and also the views and the actions of many people who are involved in this industry, I'm positive. I think this can be changed, this can be managed, and quantum computers and all technology can serve mankind rather than destroy mankind. So this is our presentation. Thank you very much indeed, Antoine, for giving us this time.
Thank you very much, Ilyas, and Anna, for this, what I would say, it is really the counterpoint to Harari, is searching, outgoing from humankind in the image of God, then artificial intelligence has to be ruled so that it can truly serve humanity. So we will now have 2 presentations which would focus more on the, I would say, legal responsibility, moral responsibility, and so stress that humankind in the image of God means also humankind called to be ruled by morality and law. Please, Matteo. Can you share screen?
Yeah. Can you see?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Antoine, for inviting me. And after this very interesting talk of Anna Pearson and Ilyas, I will try my best to answer the question that is, what role the human dignity, this concept, plays in the emerging discussion about artificial intelligence and quantum computer. So the human dignity is a very important concept, is very complex, and also a very common one. We use it in a lot of different situations, in different contexts. For example, when we say we are all equal, we are saying that we have the same human dignity, for example. Or when we say you have the right to live a dignified life, and so on. Also, the human dignity is, in a legal context, fundamental as a base for every human rights. So, in short words, it's a very important concept. I will start analyzing this concept by these 2 other concepts, the relationship and the responsibility. This idea of the human dignity is based on the relationship, because the human dignity is not an abstract concept. It concerns the identity of the person, and the identity of the person forms and grows with the other, of course, in the relationship with the other. So it's important to understand that the relationship where this human dignity is established is very relevant. So the human dignity is the result of the social and legal recognition of the personal identity. I can say that, for example, if I violate your dignity, if I hurt you, if I offend you, I indirectly decrease mine. And in an opposite perspective, I acquire my dignity through the recognition of yours. So it has to be mutual, and mutual is implicitly that is in relationship with something. The relationship is not only with the other, but also with the reality itself. The idea is that the human dignity is a concrete concept and is important the reality where it's created and the individual form is personal identity. So, and in this concept, you cannot find a single human that is disconnected from the reality where it's established, of course. The second important and relevant concept is the responsibility. The human dignity has a content rights, but also duties. And we can understand by this where the rights exist, because the rights exist only because we have the power in a way to take responsibility for our action. I put the Article 2 of the Italian Constitution as an example of this, because we can read in this article that the Republic, the Italian Republic, acknowledges and grants the human rights. So the rights that are part of the concept of the human dignity, and it requires the fulfillment of the mandatory duties of political, economic, and social solidarity. So we have a part also of the duties. We have the right only because we can take responsibility, we can take duties. And my right exists because the other have the duty. An example to make this concept clear could be that I have the right to not be killed because the other have the duty to not kill me, and I have the duty to not kill. And for this meaning, we can explain why a machine doesn't have human dignity, because the machine acts following commands of the person that assume responsibility for that action. So we don't say that a machine can take responsibility, and so it lacks an important part of the human dignity. This concept of the responsibility and relationship created the base of the human dignity in a legal point of view, of course. We can imagine two sides of the same coin. In one side, we have the duties, in the other one, we have the rights, but one cannot exist without the other. An interesting figure is the worker in this idea of the human dignity. The idea that the human found his dignity in the work is an idea that is established in the Italian Constitution at the Article 4. I'm sorry if I quote all this article of the Italian Constitution. But in this article, we read that the Republic acknowledges the right to all citizens to work, and also previously is based on the Bible, where is said that the Lord took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. So God created the man and established a duty for him. I put you in the Eden, but you have to till it and keep it. So you have to work. This idea that in the work we found our dignity is because the worker is always in relationship with the other and the reality. He knows that life is hard, is difficult, but nonetheless he faces it with responsibility. And by this struggle with reality, he acquires his dignity. In the opposite way, we can imagine a man that let himself go. He's not acting in a dignified way. We can all understand this, for example. In this slide, I say not only Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens in an oracly way, I'm saying that we are not only computation, we are not only mechanical machine that acts and are complex machine. Like, for example, is Harari saying in a point of view. With Homo sapiens, I'm saying that the human dignity adds at the equation that creates the human being also concepts like morality and laws, for example. So the human dignity, in the equation of the human dignity, we can find a lot of terms like love, as we have seen in the other talks, for example, like emotion, feelings, and also a big role is played by the morality and the law. But the human being is not something that is computation that can be incremented to the point of overcoming death and became a superhuman in the way, for example, that Harari intends. This idea, probably, or a possible foundation of this idea, is the fact that we are an image of God. In this part of Genesis, we can read that for in the image of God, as God made mankind. And the interesting part is that also Harari said that implicitly. Harari we can say that think in a way of a very mechanical and positivistic perspective, but he admits the existence of this part of the human, because in this passage we can read that when Paul of Tarsus reasoned the power of the universe, etc., Paul's argument fell on a fertile ground. So when Paul started to spread the gospel, he found the individual that were listening. The individual, in a way, felt something in each of them that was a substratum of values and feeling common at all. Because if I not feel nothing, of course, I'm not listening. So also Harari in this passage admits that there is that part of the human that in a way is called to listen to this part that is the human dignity, we can say. So the human dignity is a special kind of responsibility and is a special kind of responsibility toward us and the other. And we have the duty to respond to this call in every aspect of life. The human dignity remembered us that we are equal and we have not to discriminate against anybody in any context, for example. And this is very important to remember with the big issues and challenges of the future, with the emergence, for example, of quantum computers, with the emergence of artificial intelligence and all the implication that this kind of technology that Ilyas said perfectly are not the same as the past, will have on our life. And we have to remember that these are tools, not something that change us ontologically speaking, that change our nature. So we have to use it properly, and we have to pay attention to not discriminate in using them. The discussion about quantum physics, also from a legal point of view, must have at the center the concept of the human dignity, used as a dam against all the possible discriminatory and bad uses that can derive from this kind of technology. The human dignity, remember us that just because we can do something, it doesn't mean we have to. And so human dignity, remember us that there are limits. To conclude, I want to quote a very important writer of the 19th century, Dostoevsky, that says, in every situation, it's possible to act with dignity. If there is a struggle, this will lift you up instead of lowering you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Matteo. We go to the next presentation by Jure Plut. He will present a complementary discussion about human dignity and responsibility. Jure, please. Okay.
Thank you, Antoine. Okay, works fine.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So Harari on one point writes that the next stage of history will include changes so fundamental that they will call the very term human into question. So my presentation will revolve around that. I'll mostly stem from an Australian moral philosopher here on the left, Peter Singer, mention also Harari, and then try to provide a response to some of the views regarding the dignity of human life. So Singer, known as an altruist and a supporter of animal rights and rights to abortion and euthanasia, he interestingly advocates for a universal ethics. He's not a relativist. And he thinks about ways how to establish it. First, he claims that we shouldn't be thinking about ourselves only. This is how it all starts. And when we do that, he explains, we realize that the basic ethical fact is equality. And this equality then leads us to the principle of equal consideration of interests. Interests could be, for example, satisfying basic needs, developing abilities, or freely enjoying friends and family. But the universal interest applicable to everyone is the capacity for suffering and enjoyment. And Singer suggests that this is also true for animals. This is what he states, for example. Pain and suffering are bad and should be prevented or minimized, irrespective of the race, sex, or species of the being that suffers. And he goes on saying that it's not right to put our own interests in front of the interests of animals. And this, of course, leads him to some sort of vegetarianism. Okay, one more. To give preference to the life of a being simply because that being is a member of our species would put us in the same position as racists who give preference to those who are members of their race. So the biological fact of being a Homo sapiens does not have a real moral significance. However, we are also persons, and Singer is aware of that. So he summarizes some characteristics of personhood, and by doing this, he provides reasons why a human being shouldn't be killed. Here they are. So we are conscious and afraid of death. We are also interested in living, and denying that would be wrong. And human beings are also autonomous and rational. All these points have to be, with Singer, have to be understood with regard to the universal interest I've mentioned. So the capacity for suffering and enjoyment. So all of this seems quite reasonable, right? The problem is, what about the children? What about infants? They're not really conscious or interested in living. What about the intellectually disabled? They are far from being autonomous. Killing such people, Singer claims, cannot be equated with killing normal, healthy human beings. He states, for example, the following. When the death of a disabled infant will lead to the birth of another infant with better prospects of a happy life, the total amount of happiness will be greater if the disabled infant is killed. So to paraphrase it, it's better to replace disabled children with healthy ones. We may find that striking, he says, but only because we are still attached to the outdated notion on the sanctity of human life. And in fact, he is a controversial figure. His events have been cancelled because of people protesting against him. So to summarize, the important thing for him is to consider the interests involved, the lack of suffering being the most important of them. and not only for humans, but also animals. We're only better than animals because of our superior personhood or superior abilities. And we could connect that actually with the viewpoint of Harari. There is no doubt that Homo sapiens is the most powerful species in the world. Homo sapiens also likes to think that it enjoys a superior moral status. This is less obvious. So with this quote, Harari introduces the chapter called The Human Spark. And of course, if there is no unique or magical spark, as he calls it, human beings are replaceable with quantum AI, or in simplest terms, we are intrinsically worth the same as primates. Harari also speaks of human beings not having soul, yet he does acknowledge, on the other hand, that the belief to have it is a central pillar of a legal, political, and economic system. Let's take a quick look now at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In the preamble, it is stated that they refer to all members of the human family, all members of Homo sapiens. But this line really begs the question, why? What's so special about us? Because Singer would say that this is just a form of human speciesism, like racism or sexism. Harari would say, yes, we are morally on top, but only because of our superior intelligence and power. When AI gets the advantage, human beings may all just become its servants in this process of evolution. So providing a solid foundation for the dignity of Homo sapiens is a challenging task. But let me try to provide a short response to all I've said and then conclude. So the problem with Singer is that he focuses too much on the amount of happiness, on the preferred states of life. Singer, for example, when discussing postnatal abortion, writes how it's much easier to diagnose newborns for potential defects. And upon this diagnosis, the parents could then make a more informative decision whether to keep the baby or not. So he has this chilling rationalistic approach towards infants, while on the other hand, he bases his ethics on happiness and enjoyment of life, which is really a subjective realm of emotions. So his two approaches are radically incompatible. An approach which integrates both reason and emotion should rather be promoted. And one philosophical stance suitable for this is personalism. In personalism, a human being is someone inviolable, irreplaceable, someone who should always be considered as an end and never as a means, because he or she is not something but someone, regardless of character, age, or abilities. So this personalistic concept of personhood reaches also to embryos indeterminately ill, because even if the full expression of it cannot or hasn't yet taken place, the substance of personhood is present in everyone. And having this substance is an intrinsic property of being human. And the only proper attitude we can adopt towards persons is to wish what's best for them. In other words, this is with the quote of Saint John Paul II, who is also known as a personalist. The person is a kind of good to which only love constitutes the proper and fully mature relation. So to conclude that, this goes very much in line of humankind being created in the image of God, as it's suggested by the Genesis and the New Testament. And this promotes an integrated approach to the dignity of human family, rather than perhaps limited views of both Singer and Harari. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much to all the speakers in this second part of the meeting. We have no time for discussion. Here there is, first of all, a question by Dennis to Ilyas, then a question from Dan, also to Ilyas, and then a question by Sam to everyone. And Francesco Urso has an answer to Alfred's question. So let's start with Dennis, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. No, thank you for these presentations, and especially this one about this complex technology. And I was wondering at the end of this presentation, when Ilyas said as a conclusion, one of his points was, don't consider quantum computers as just yet another computer. And what did you mean exactly with that? I think I got what you thought, but I think in a philosophical point of view, it's just another computer, but maybe for their implications in our daily life, like security and much more things, it will be it's a big power, and we need appropriate responsibility to use that. But in a philosophical sense, it's just another computer. And as Anna said, it will never be. I don't remember the exact expression, but quantum computers will never be human intelligence. Human being, yes.
Yes.
That's why.
Thank you.
I think that
yes.
I thank you, Dennis, for the question. I saw your comment as well, and I'm glad you spoke rather than me just replying to the comment. It's it would be very difficult for me to encapsulate this answer in the 30 seconds that we can allocate to it, but I'd like to really make the following point. First of all, I think the church Turing thesis, or even the extended church Turing thesis, essentially what can be computable can be built, and what can be derived from that built computer can be computed on any device, obviously extends to a quantum computer as well as a classical computer. So then in that context, yes, I would agree very basically that it's another computer. However, I think the idea that we can suddenly utilize nature to compute rather than these contrived transistors is quite fundamental. We have in our reach now things which simply could not be done. They're not just in security, Dennis. I mean, security is something that gets a lot of press, but material discovery in particular, and the many degrees of freedom that will allow us, when we utilize Hilbert space, to do things like natural language processing, are just two examples of things which are literally untractable. They have not been capable of being done in the last 70 years. And then I would finish by saying, from my perspective, Anna may wish to comment. Of course, Antoine should comment as well. He's right in the center of this. But from my perspective, I would like to finish by saying that we have seen how we have been challenged by classical compute. And you mentioned this idea that qubit or Hilbert space is not infinite. Well, in fact, it is really. superposition is infinite. We'll never know. The continuum exists between 0 and 1, and all of these positions are occupied as best we can tell. The problem is we run out of language. So when you typed your thing in the question and you use the word infinite, immediately we all coalesce around this definition, which is imperfect. So I'd encourage you not to think of this as absolute or a continuum versus a discrete. I'd encourage you to think of this as tapping into the power of nature, because nature is quantum mechanical and we've never done that before. But I don't know, Anna, if you have a different opinion.
Please.
I'll leave time for the other questions. Yeah.
Okay, Dan, please, Dan, you have a question also regarding quantum computing.
Yes.
Dan.
Thank you, Ilyas, also and Anna, and all the other presenters. Very nice. So you're kind of professionally facing the challenge of leading the technology of quantum computing into the service of mankind, which is very beautiful. But of course, if you release a new technology into society, it means that a lot can happen. And so basically my question is, well, you can give a good example, that's very important, but is there anything that you think you can do, or maybe we should do, to make sure more broadly that the technology is implemented ethically? And yeah, thank you.
Well, first of all, Dan, as I said to you in an email when I first heard you in, I think, January, I'm forever grateful for you bringing to my attention Polo. I mean, this was something which was kind of out there. And since I read your book and since I then did some more research, this rich beauty of the thinking of this amazing man, this amazing intellectual, has become a part of my life. So I'm very grateful to you for opening that door. Look, I think that, this is a multifaceted issue, and one person will not change this. So I've decided that what I'm about to tell you is what I want to do. And I alone will not solve this. So in addition to trying to be an exemplar of what I would describe as Christian values, which is a starting point. We do that as parents, we do that as friends, we do that as leaders in our business, so that's a given, I hope. What I'd like to do is to try and encourage, to be honest with you, Christians around the world to take their place in the public square and lead by example in this debate. Laws alone cannot work. Now, Dan, I used to teach ethics at the University of Cambridge, and especially for the younger people, the people who are in the first year of their postgraduate degree doing an MPhil, they very quickly reduced the conversation to, oh, it's legal, so therefore it must be okay. And we all know that that is not the case. So what I'm trying to do is by articles, by these types of things, focus on bringing the Christian voice into the debate, because I think the Christian voice in the debate on so many things in the last 30 years has been absent. I mean, not because we didn't care and not because we didn't write, but because we're an echo chamber. And, oh, well, we shouldn't talk about this because people will leave me. And I'm like the opposite. I really don't give and I think we have to be forceful. We have to have a Christian voice here. This is our time to influence this debate. So this is my simple, I mean, there are many, many other things, Dan, that I could say, but to keep it simple, that's what I would say.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Here, I would like to give the floor to Vuko. You have a comment for Anna and the question for Jure, please.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go on.
So I was very grateful because I fully agree with it, with your reaction that science isn't just about practical application, doing something and controlling, but the importance of amazement and awe and wonder in front of nature, I think, has always been a very important part of science, and I think about natural science, with physics, chemistry, biology. And I really think it's important to stress this point. And it's actually interesting that this is a point which is often getting lost. I mean, all of us having to write funding grants, and I have it very vivid because I just spent a very significant amount of the last month working on a grant application, know that we have to stress what can we do with what we are, and this is the value of abasement is really something which is partly getting lost, and therefore really grateful to Anna for having stressed this, because I really fully agree, and I think it's a very important drive in what made our science successful. Then, if I may switch gears completely and about the talk of Jure, whom I really liked a lot as well. And I think there is a very interesting, maybe a weak point in one of your first quotes of Peter Singer. He's saying, okay, we have to respect the interests of all beings. I mean, I feel that this have to is very weakly motivated, actually. I mean, what is comes almost from heaven, like this Kantian moral imperative.
Bucco, try to go near to the micro. Try to go near to the micro.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, how does he actually motivate this? Why do I have to respect all other beings if there is no inherent value in them? And then I think related to this, okay, fine, total sum of happiness. I mean, why should I care about it? And I think these are left like some value which I'm not even sure why I should respect it. I mean, why should I care about the total value of happiness? Because it seems like a very impersonal thing.
Please, a short answer.
Yes, Hugo, it's a great point, actually. So the thing is that what's common for all beings is that we don't like to suffer. So this is something universal, and we all tend to alleviate suffering. And this is not only true for human beings, but also animals. So why do we have to do this? Because we are all equal. We want that, you know, we don't want suffering for ourselves, but also we don't want suffering for others as well. But if I may, I hope I'm not doing injustice to his work, to Singer's work, but I think this is how he would respond. If I may touch upon the comment by Sam as well, who asked about how we can measure happiness, it's closely connected with this. It's not possible really to measure happiness, right? But he stems from this fact of, you know, the lack of suffering being something that we all strive to. So he measures happiness, we could say, on the wish to be healthy, to be without problems with health. So it has to do with this. So one man who was born disabled lives a less happy life than someone who was born healthy. So this is where he comes from, and I agree with you. Perhaps if we share this opinion, that you know, it is a very limited view on both happiness and both fulfillment of life and also enjoyment of life.
Well, thank you. Yeah. We have to move. Then eventually the remaining questions can come in the general discussion. We come now to the three parts of the meeting. That is the question about dating Adam and Eve in the Neolithic. So to meet the explanation of Robin Dunbar that the doctrinal religions appear in the Neolithic. I will present, starting with the quotation by Robin Dunbar, that he states that the centerpiece of the Neolithic is actually the invention of mechanisms that allowed people to live together without killing each other. For these animistic forms of religiosity were not sufficient, but something more robust was needed. Dunbar's statement matches this declaration in Genesis, where God states, from each human being, I will demand an accounting for the life of another human being, and states that the reason for this is that in the image of God has God made mankind. By contrast, humans can use animals for food. So we could interpret this by stating God provided the mechanisms that allowed people to live together without killing each other, by engraving this prohibition of homicide in the heart of each human person coming into existence, as a moral archetype in the collective unconscious conscious of humanity. I argue in the following that the accurate analysis of this passage of Genesis allows us to date this declaration of God in the Neolithic. This passage of Genesis established the basic rule of morality and the foundation of law. Humans ought to live respecting each other, but are allowed to kill animals for food. This declaration presupposes that one can unambiguously distinguish between humankind and animals, as it is the case today. You see, at the present time, species are distinct. Chimps and bonobos are likely the genetically closest relatives to Homo sapiens today. Nonetheless, chimps and sapiens appear today as two sharply separated species. Today, we can unambiguously establish which creature is sapiens and which is non-sapiens. At which time this sharp distinction we have today become established, I relate here to this publication, to this article 2 years ago by a group of 23 leading scientists, computational biologists, geneticists, anthropologists, and here you see Richard Dorbin and Mark Thomas, who had in previous meetings as speakers. This article, most important article, states that modern humans are one species, but with many origins, and that Homo sapiens reaches the full set of features we see in living people today at the end of the Pleistocene, beginning of the Neolithic, about 12,000 years ago. So today there is a sharp difference between humans and chimps. About at the origins of the civilization, this difference was already there. At the origin of the Neolithic, by about 12,000 years ago, was already there. But if you go further back, things become complicated and very fuzzy. Actually, there is no single origin, not one origin of Homo sapiens. There are many origins. So that, and there is a lot of interbreeding between related near living forms. So you see, if all the intermediate varieties were still there, it would be impossible to distinguish between humans and non-humans. So it is this disappearance that allows us to have the distinct situation we have today. The sharp distinction between sapiens and non-sapiens we have today became established by 12,000 years ago. So that is what we learned from Thomas and Richard Dorbin, the conventional single origin view evolution as a tree is being replaced by the new many origins model evolution as a patchwork. So the idea of a first sapiens individual is nonsensical. By contrast, we can say when the distinction between sapiens and non-sapiens became as sharp as it is today. By creating a sharp gap between sapiens and chimps bonobos, evolution laid the groundwork in order humans can live according to the foundation of law. Humans ought to live respecting each other because God made them in the image of God, but are allowed to kill animals for food. This declaration in Genesis presupposes that one can unambiguously distinguish between humankind and animals. The unambiguous distinction between humankind and animals is a necessary condition for the declaration of Genesis. So we are taught by evolutionary science that at about 12,000 years ago, this difference became as sharp as it is today, as it was at the time of Jesus Christ, and it was at the time of the writing of Genesis. The necessary condition for the prohibition of homicide in Genesis is fulfilled at about 12,000 years BP. So it is fitting to consider that the creation of humankind in the image of God happens after this date. But there is a further aspect. The prohibition of homicide contains tightly united three main ingredients: accountability toward God, accountability toward humankind, being in the image of God. Accountability toward humankind is a reference to penal laws and trials. Being, the reason is because being in the image of God. In the same line of thinking, you have the tree of knowledge of good and evil. This term, good and evil, used in Genesis to describe God's primeval commandment, was also used in the legal context to describe legal responsibility. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, it highlights the legal background of Genesis. It comes into focus if one pays attention to certain elements. God's promulgation of the law to humankind, followed by men's deliberate transgression, and the subsequent trial with judgment and sentences. And this legal background emerged in the declaration of Genesis 9:3-5-6. Achievements that reveal rational personhood with awareness of moral and legal responsibility can be considered clear signs that God did already make the first human beings in the image of God. And such achievements are concomitant with the origin of civilizations by about 5,300 years ago. Like this we see here, God created the first human beings in the image of God later than 12,000 BP, but not later than 5,300 BP. There is no first sapiens individual. By contrast, there is a first human being created by God in the image of God. Robin Dunbar states, the centerpiece of the Neolithic is the invention of mechanisms that allowed people to live together without killing each other. We can interpret, God provided this mechanism. And Robin Dunbar's statement is another way to say that there is a universal divine revelation. Thank you for your attention. This has some implications that will be presented by Theo and by Timothée. Please.
Okay, thank you, Antoine. I'll just share my screen.
Yes.
Can you all see and hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Go.
Yes, great. Okay, so hi, my name's Theo. I'm actually still an undergrad. I study physics and philosophy at the University of Manchester. So I'm especially privileged to be part of this conference. So thank you, Antoine, for this opportunity. Today, I'll be distinguishing and assessing two types of models that try to explain how and by what means we are all in the image of God, given that Adam and Eve were in the Neolithic. So, assuming its correctness, anthropology has come to conclusions that challenge Adamic religions to provide better answers to questions surrounding Genesis and human creation. First, it's widely accepted that, like other animals, merely biological humans have evolved over millions of years and evolved as part of a population, not simply from a pair. Lastly, as Antoine has just detailed, it seems that Adam and Eve should have existed in the Neolithic. Adamic religions, specifically Christianity, posit that at least by the time of Jesus, all hominids are humans in the image of God, called to enter into the divine beatitude. Just to note, I will use godlikeness and being in the image of God interchangeably, although I know that's not exactly precise. So, accepting all this, how did it come to be that we are all in the image of God? So, if consistent with anthropology, heredity is probably the most obvious model for the transmission of godlikeness. The model goes that just as we inherit eye color from our parents, we also inherit godlikeness. So to be clear, godlikeness is not constrained to our genes, but could be passed down via heredity nonetheless. So if Adam and Eve were the only ones created in God's image, then it is only their descendants which will also be in God's image. Joshua Swamidass published a book last year called Genealogical Adam and Eve. The main aim of this book is to show that it is possible to have a genealogical, not genetic, common ancestor up to around 3000 BC. Swamidass explains this through the introduction of genetic ghosts, which are ancestors who pass on no unique or recognizable genes, but are still part of our family tree. We will distinguish between this type of model, which is heredity alone, and other types of models by looking at marriage. So there is an initial couple or population, Adam and Eve, and existing at the same time are merely biological humans. In order for everyone to eventually be in the image of God, Adam and Eve need to be ancestors of us all. And for this to happen, descendants of Adam and Eve must procreate with or marry merely biological humans. So what happens at the marriage of a human in the image of God and a merely biological human? There are two plausible options. So one, the pair is mismatched, where the merely biological human remains that way, marrying a human in the image of God. This allows for the transmission of godlikeness through heredity alone. Secondly, the pair's natures could be matched. At some point before or at marriage, the merely biological human receives godlikeness. In order for this to happen, we require a means of transmission instead of or as well as heredity. Thus, to examine whether heredity alone is acceptable, we can look at whether marriages with mismatched partners are acceptable. Let's take a closer look at the first approach, that the natures of married couples are mismatched. As a pro, this allows for godlikeness. To be transmitted through heredity alone, and in that way it is simple. However, there are three quite considerable cons for this approach. First, would this model involve bestiality? Second, are mismatched natures against Christ's teachings on marriage? Third, and lastly, is a universal prohibition of homicide, as given in Genesis 9, a reasonable request for communities with mismatched marriages? So let's go into these three concerns in more detail. So if being in the image of God means being called to divine beatitude, to be transformed into the image of Jesus Christ, then merely biological humans do not share this call. Therefore, humans in the image of God freely choose to procreate with lesser beings, which raises bestiality concerns. In order to avoid this, the merely biological partner has to become in the image of God at some point before or at procreation or marriage. But this would require some mechanism other than heredity, which is exactly what this approach is trying to avoid. The second objection is about whether marriages with mismatched partners go against Jesus' teaching on marriage. So in Matthew 19, Jesus says, "Two will become one flesh." The actual flesh of two humans can never be merged fully. Therefore, it must be something else, something abstract that is being unified, their personal natures. Now, if something is one, then it has one nature, or at least not multiple contradicting natures. In order for two to become one, the two in question may have different natures to begin with, but when unified, share the same nature, for they are now one. For example, I can't truly become one with the sofa, however disappointing that is, or however hard I try, because I do not share the sofa's nature. It's a concrete object, and I am a human in the image of God. And there is no sacrament for such union, because the union is incompatible. And what God has joined together, let no one separate, implies that the pair have a bond that even they themselves cannot break. Even if they flee to opposite ends of the earth, this bond still exists. Thus, this cannot be a merely physical or natural bond. It must be a supernatural bond. And such a bond can only be had by those with a supernatural nature, that of being in the image of God. And lastly, from the beginning, implies that marriage has always been this way, before the time of Christ too. In total, therefore, we can paraphrase this section of Matthew's Gospel with a focus on our current interests, as from the very first marriage, all married couples share a supernatural nature, that of being in the image of God. Thus, it seems the mismatch and heredity alone approach directly conflict with Christ's teaching about marriage. The third concern for mismatch approach relates to ethics and whether it is reasonable to prohibit homicide and other moral commands in mismatched communities. So according to the mismatch approach, there would have been communities that consisted of those in the image of God and destined for eternal life, and also merely biological humans. And we know from anthropology that all individuals will be physically indistinguishable by the Neolithic. In other words, there are no human subspecies, just anatomically modern humans. Those in the image of God will look the same as those who are not in the image of God. So here's the problem. In Genesis 9, God speaks to Noah and explicitly prohibits homicide. This law presupposes, as Antoine said, that there is a clear, observable difference between humans in the image of God, who have rights and duties, and creatures without this dignity and without such rights and duties. This would be a confusing and unreasonable rule if one could easily mistake a merely biological creature for a human in the image of God. And this would be the case in mismatched communities, as those in the image of God could easily be mistaken for those who aren't. Thus, the command of God in Genesis 9 does not fit with the idea of mismatched communities. Having looked at three concerns arising from mismatched marriage, we can now turn to matched marriages, where both partners share the same nature, i.e. the merely biological human becomes in the image of God at some point before or at marriage. The matched approach requires that heredity is not the only mechanism for transmission of godlikeness. The pros of this approach are the flip sides of the concern for the mismatch approach. So it does fit with Christ's teaching about a supernatural bond between a couple. And since both parties have the same nature, there's no bestiality concerns. And thirdly, under this approach, there need not be any mismatched communities. And so God's commandment apply uncontroversially to all. But there are a couple of concerns for this approach too, which we'll take a quick look at. The first concern asks, when does the merely biological human inherit godlikeness? To which options have been put forward? And such proposed answers include options like at the moment of procreation or at the moment of marriage, or once the merely biological human enters into the vicinity of the community in the image of God. Nevertheless, the suggested options seem more arbitrary than at the point of conception, as the hereditary alone model would have it. It's important to note too that both this and the following concern can only go as far as to assign theoretical vices to the matched approach, but cannot act as a refutation. The second concern notes that a more complicated theory is less desirable as far as there is no necessity for complexity. The matched approach requires another mechanism as well as heredity, or a different, less intuitive mechanism. Thus, it may be more complicated. However, this other method could be the same method God used to create Adam and Eve as beings in the image of God, and thus does not introduce a new mechanism. Further, following from the discussion of the mismatch approach, another mechanism may actually be necessary, in which case there are grounds for it being more complex. There are plenty of exciting avenues to pursue in answer to both of these concerns, inviting investigation and creativity. On the other hand, the concerns of mismatched marriages are pretty damaging, with not much, if any, wriggle room. So overall, I would say that the matched marriages approach is far preferable to the mismatched approach. So this brings me to conclude that Adam and Eve existed in the Neolithic, assuming that Adam and Eve existed in the Neolithic, and by looking at the potential natures of ancient married couples, heredity alone is not a suitable mechanism for the transmission of godlikeness. Well, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Theo, for this very accurate analysis. We are a bit late in time, so I ask Timothy.
Sorry about that.
No, it is no problem. Timothy, please, Timothy will present another implication.
So we're already, that's the last presentation, so most of the stuff I'll be saying here, you probably have heard that already. So, I mean, for the little story, so this topic come after a discussion I have with Antoine. So discussing about pygmies in the Equatorial Forest. I was telling him the story of a friend of mine who went to live a couple of days with pygmies, and because he was working around, and he was trying to understand them. He was telling me, those people are just different to the way they understand the world, the religious notion they have. So, and also they seem to have kind of diminished intellectual abilities. Are they really fully human? So I say, I don't know, but intuitively I say, well, they are human because they possess kind of some dignity. They are made in the image of God. But at the same time, I was kind of struggling. They say, well, if they don't act like us, the notion of religion and society, how it is organized, is different. So I was kind of struggling with that question. So Antoine suggested me to do some research, and I came up with this: do modern animists possess human dignity? So for the little thing, I mean, to just terminology, when discussing animism, it can mean two things. It can first refer to a religion practiced by modern indigenous people, like the pygmies I was talking about, or aborigines, all kind of people living in the Bushman living in the Kalahari Desert, or some Indian tribes in the Amazon. Animism can also mean the religion of humans pre-sapiens. In this timeline, so I've put this red line to distinguish the two periods, which we have here, all the hominids living there. They have kind of, I mean, religious practice, but we don't know what it was like. So they call it sometimes animism or some sort of primitive religion. Animism as a religion is a relationship with the natural world, animate or inanimate, which possess a personhood. So a tree, a piece of stone can somehow be venerated in the context of animism. So the evolutionary theory of religion has come up with something interesting. First, thanks to the initial success in helping to explain the origin of biological species, the hypothesis of evolution has been used to explain in varied fields as biology, obviously physics, philosophy, and also anthropology. Religion, just like a biological species, may have evolved from a primitive form of animism to more developed and complex polytheism, monotheism, and some even say the scientific rationalism. Animism is therefore the primitive form of religion. That's a clear affirmation some in that milieu used to defend. Contrary to biological species, which only left fossils, animism still coexists with its evolved form. This is something interesting. Today, it is universally agreed that all humans possess a kind of dignity, no matter their religious belief. So the question we would like to answer here is, if modern animists are associated with primitive form of religion, do they still possess some human dignity as we who practice some sort of more evolved form of religion? Spoiler alert, the answer is yes. Obviously, they have human dignity. So there are three elements that anthropologists usually used to track back animism of people living before the Neolithic. So the first one is the observation of modern animists to infer on the pre-sapiens animist. The second one is archaeological findings in burial sites of human remains and the probable existence of some artifact. Those three elements are not kind of a clear cut. They are not reliable. There's no reliable evidence of archaeological remaining as religious sign of hunter-gatherers for pre-Neolithic. Religion also as a cultural evolution phenomenon is very difficult to track. We don't know really when this happened, what it means. And there's no also a clear dating of primitive religion. Did it appear when the cognitive revolution happened, before that? So all those doubts led us to kind of rely on some theory developed by Robin Dunbar that was previously mentioned. Robin Dunbar suggests tying the beginning of animistic religion to the beginning of human language and the capability of mentalizing things. That happened 200,000 years ago. So religion at that time, or what those two elements that make religion practice possible were already available, just as it is to us nowadays. Is animism the primitive religion? The short answer is we don't really know. We don't really know. We don't really know. Modern animism may share some features with primitive animism, but we don't have evidence to affirm that they are identical or very similar. Inferences made observing modern animism, such as some mystical trances we can also observe in modern animists, are also present in doctrinal religions. Even in Christian, they talk about some mystic, Saint Teresa d'Avila or Saint John of the Cross, just to name a few. Let's now mention some problems with the evolutionary vision of religion. The evolutionary vision, assuming the evolutionary vision of religion can lead to reductionist concept of humanity. If we assume that animism is a primitive form of religion, and as such, an important expression of primitive culture, animists in the Kalahari Desert, for example, can be considered inferior to doctrinal religion adepts. This could have created a lot of problems. Our modern intuition tells us that that is not true simply. Humans, no matter the religion they belong, no matter, sorry, the religion they belong to, possess a special status intrinsic to their nature. So what makes Sapiens post-Neolithic special? So here we have Sapiens coexisting with the rest of hominids and mixing each other's. And something happened here. The difference between the hominids, and including Sapiens living here, and the one living here is really different. The difference is really big, sorry. The difference is so sharp and inconsistent with normal evolution that we may say, well, Sapiens 2.0 is the result of something extraordinary, which, as Antoine say, the creation of the human being at the image of God may have happened somewhere in the Neolithics. Do modern animists who are living nowadays too possess human dignity? What can I tell to my friend who was having some doubt about pygmies, despite having kind of this natural intuition, say, well, they are human after all. What can I tell him? Yes, they have human dignity because at one point in the history, in the Neolithic, God may have intervened to make all living sapiens in that time at his image and conferring them a special status. Human dignity, as founded on human created in the image of God, is an unshakable defense of humankind. Universal human dignity is nowadays taken for granted that we barely realize that this wouldn't be so obvious without the Judeo-Christian notion of humans created in the image of God. To finish, we talk a lot about Yuval Harari with his idea of evolution of religion, which is very materialistic. But I wanted also to mention another historian who has in common with Yuval Harari the fact that he's an atheist. His name is Tom Holland. He wrote a very interesting book. In his book, Dominion, the author offers what can be considered as the best modern apologetics of Christianity written by an atheistic author. It highlights, I quote, "The impact of Christianity on the way we live, think, and speak has been extraordinarily pervasive, and not only in the West. Whether we like it or not, we live in a society still utterly saturated by Christian concepts and assumptions. We could not even rebel against this heritage without resort to Christian vocabulary, Christian ethical tools, and Christian notions of rebirth and renewal." That was me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Timothy, also for this presentation. Well, I think there are surely a lot of questions, but I see Mark Fox is in the audience. Mark, could you present these quotations by C.S. Lewis, please?
Okay, I'll just see if I can find them. Give me a minute and I will dig them out.
Okay, yes. Then I see here a question about who is here. Okay, Gennaro, please, you want to address some comment to Theo, Gennaro?
I was just saying that I was agreeing with Ilyas about the soundness and the accurateness of his presentation.
Excellent.
So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And as you just seen, thank you for saying that. It's really kind.
Okay. So then let me see.
Okay, I found this now. I'll just show you a slide.
Please.
Yeah.
Because it is interesting, these quotations with relation to that dating Adam and Eve in the Neolithic. please.
Yep. Can you hope you can see my screen?
Yes, very well. Yes, but you could make full. Yes.
I'll try and go
full screen. Yes.
Is that any better?
Yes, better. Perfect.
Whoops.
Go. Could you switch on your video, please?
Yeah. There you go. Right. So this is from C.S. Lewis's book, The Problem of Pain. Why he has it in this book, I'm not quite sure, but he's talking about original sin, etc., etc. Basically, this is the quote. So he says, "For long centuries, God perfected the animal form, which was to become the vehicle of humanity in the image of himself. He gave it hands whose thumbs could be applied to each of the fingers, and jaws and teeth and throat capable of articulation, and a brain sufficiently complex to execute all of the material motions whereby rational thought is incarnated." So that's sort of, you would be calling that pre-sapiens hominids, these sort of bunch over here, I suppose. "This creature may have existed at this stage for ages before it became a man, may have been clever enough to make things which a clever archaeologist would accept as proof of its humanity." So we're talking about 12,000 years ago, where we know we've got cave paintings that are much older than that. "But it was only an animal because all its physical and psychical processes were directed by purely material natural ends." So that's basically speculating that this is just a pure quote from Lewis. And he's saying you've got these people who look like they are hominids, but they aren't hominids because all their things are directed to pure material and natural ends. So that's the main quote. Now wait a minute, there's if I can find it. There's another quote which I'll have to find. Those are intelligent apes, by the way. Okay. Let me just see where the.
Please.
Oh yeah, here it is. The creation of man. Right. "Then in the fullness of time, God caused to descend upon this organism, both on its psychology and physiology, a new kind of consciousness, which could say I and me, which could look upon itself as an object, which knew God, which could make judgments of truth, beauty, and goodness, which was so far above time that it could perceive time flowing past." So basically, he's more or less saying what you're saying, Antoine.
Yes.
Of course, there are problems. I do remember when I first came out and we talked about this 5 years ago, and instantly, I think Dermot was there, says, "I don't like this. You're talking about bestiality here." "Judged by his artifacts, or perhaps even by his language, this blessed creature was no doubt a savage. All that experience and practice can teach, he still had to learn. If he chipped flints, he doubtless chipped them clumsily enough. He may have been utterly incapable of expressing in conceptual form his paradisal experience. I do not doubt of this paradisal man," that's the one in the image of God, "and could now appear among us. We should regard him as an utter savage, a creature to be exploited or best patronized. Only one of two, those the holiest among us, will glance a second time the naked, shaggy-bearded, slow-spoken creature. They after humans will fall at his feet." There you are. So that's what Lewis says on the subject, which is interesting. It does, he was thinking about these sort of things a long time ago before he didn't have the kind of knowledge we have from modern genetic biology. I think that's it.
Okay, thank
There's
you.
There's plenty of other quotes. You should go and read Problem of Pain.
Okay.
I'll stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Mark. So it is an interesting quotation, I think, because supports also the idea that one could date Adam and Eve in the Neolithic. As you have seen, there are different implications, different issues, which have been referred to by Theo and Timothée. So there is a lot of work to do. And we will continue discussing this subject on the 4th of September 4th, coming September 4th, so that anyone who wants to contribute to this discussion on Adam and Eve in the Neolithic can send me a proposal for a presentation. Well, now we have time for discussing, please.
May I ask something?
Yes, please.
This is a question to everyone. I really liked Ilyas's proposal earlier to maybe see whether we can reach out to the public, because this is indeed Harari's discussion has had a lot of impact more generally in society. And I think a Christian voice there indeed would be really welcome. I don't know whether anyone has ideas about how to go about that, because I think it's a very relevant question.
Yes. Before we continue, we would like to congratulate Mark Fox for his 60th birthday.
We should sing happy birthday to him. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Mark. Happy birthday to you.
So
I'm now a senior citizen.
Well, then let's go with other questions. What are you here?
May I ask a question?
Yes, yes.
I sent the question as well. You know my opinion, Antoine. For me, there is a problem with the appearance of real human beings in the Neolithic.
Yes, yes.
Because of the burials.
Yes.
A burial, for me, we have a proof of a being capable of thinking beyond death. As it's not a purely material thinking.
Yes.
Lewis said. So how can you explain that you have the first burial, I don't know, 60,000 years ago?
Yes.
Far before Neolithic. For me, it's a problem. For me, the burials will be the big criteria to the proof that we have a religious being when you have a burial.
Exactly. This you will present this view in September. Yes.
Yes, of course. It could be interesting to know the opinion of the people. I don't know.
Clear. You can. Please, is someone want to answer this, or I could answer, but I prefer that another. That is one question. There is also. Let me see. There is Dancho. Dancho has also a question. Probably it could be, Dancho, could you ask your question too?
No, all I was saying is that I'm glad, well, first of all, to thank you and everyone for organizing this again. And we hope you can come back to another home.
Yes, we hope.
Just to say that I think the issue of consciousness, the self-realization of the I, the knowledge of being a subject, I think this is a very key thing that distinguishes us from animals, and also a very, very important thing that distinguishes us from computers. And anyway, I could elaborate, but I don't know if anyone wants to mention more on this. I mean, Mark referred to it when he read some of the C.S. Lewis comments, but I think maybe this is a topic to discuss in more depth, because there I see a very clear distinction between animals and computers, and we are there. Neither animals are conscious of themselves, nor computers, even if they can do many operations. Anyway, maybe it's more of a comment than a question, but I leave it there.
Please, Ilyas, do you want to answer?
No, not answer. I think,
comment.
As you've rightly pointed out, I think maybe in the next session, this might be something that emerges. Hello, Father. Hello, all friends in Netherhall. Wonderful place. I wish I was there right now. I just wanted to say, just recently, I did a paper on consciousness, and my collaborators, my co-authors were a Buddhist and an atheist, self-confessed Buddhist, atheist and a Buddhist. And the issue of consciousness at this particular point in time, and whether it's emergent or whether it's a primitive, and how that distinguishes from mere devices. I think you're absolutely right, Father, to pick on this. And I think it also is a debate which is capable of being had in a very diverse community, but where we as Christians can show our leadership by understanding the universality of the human condition and the way that consciousness pervades it. So I'm so happy, Father, that you raised this. I'll send to Antoine a link to the paper. It's in an open access journal called Entropy. So it's not behind a paywall.
Okay, thank you. Well, I would short answer to Jan David by stating that if you can prove roughly, rigorously that burials are seen for being created in the image of God and reveal moral and even legal responsibility, as Genesis 9:6 suggests, then I would accept this without problem, no? But I would say, in any case, at latest, by the dawn of civilization, you can clearly establish that we have the creation in the image of God. So, and certainly there are a lot of implications. I would say something that it has not been mentioned, but it is important, is that we have to fit in the picture, we have to fit the flood, okay? The flood are 4 chapters of Genesis. And so we have to make sense of this. We have to make sense of this, you see. And this relates to the whole issue with the analysis, the magnificent analysis by Theo with the matched marriage or not. And also with the whole issue of the animism related by Timothy. Burials are only a mere sign of animism, but not yet a sign of being called to divine beatitude. You see, all this is discussed. Okay?
Okay. Thank you, Antoine, for everything.
Thank you a lot. Well, we have to finish, and I would like to say a short comment to finish. Let me see. We arrived to the concluding remarks of this meeting. We have stressed the importance of this covenant between God and humankind in the image of God to support the idea that humankind is something special. I think without this reference, it will be very, very difficult to found this special dignity. And in any case, I think by any way you try to do this, at the end, you will end with this acknowledging the importance of this fact that humankind is created in the image of God. So it is this intervention of God which made Homo sapiens to a community ordered to love God, to reach divine bliss, and called to be ruled by morality and law. Yuval Harari sharply describes and supports the spreading mentality today that humankind in the image of God is a totally outdated model. This is the mentality we are facing today, and I think for this reason is quite important what Ilyas stated, that we have to take a clear position in this point. Harari is describing this mentality and supporting it because he says, no, the transformations which are going are so fundamental that they will call the very term human into question. So we are more powerful than ever before, self-made gods, we are accountable to no one. This is the mentality the dominant mentality today. Will humankind in the image of God disappear and become replaced by the superior species? No, provided we then go rid of the principles that make humankind precious and unique. Probably the most important one of these principles is the incarnation of God. It is a very strong defense of humanity. St. Thomas Aquinas put this in this way: the full participation of the divinity is the true bliss of man and the end of human life. And he stresses, quoting Augustine, that God was made man so that man might be made God. So we can become Homo Deus thanks that God became Deus Homo. So the word became flesh to make us partakers, to make us Homo Deus. And this is a very strong defense of humanity, likely, in my view, the strongest one. You have heard Timothy about Tom Holland and how he is stating that if you even to rebel against Christianity, you have to invoke Christian principles. Why is this so? He is implicitly acknowledging that Christianity amounts to a radical defense of humanity because of the reality of the incarnation of God. The incarnation of God gives humankind a special dignity. And so any attempt against humankind and against humanity, you can fight against this in the name of Christianity. So another aspect we have seen, we have to complete the philosophical perspective based on thinking, I think, therefore I am, or knowledge equal algorithm. I say we have not to replace it, but to complete with a philosophical perspective based on love. I love, therefore we are knowledge equal algorithms plus love. Here it seems to me very important, quite important what Anna Pearson stated. It is that science and scientific knowledge is more than algorithm. It is a form of worship to God already. More than half of all Christian teens and 20s live active involvement in church and in religion. And these digital natives live mainly because, not because of scandals or things like this, but because they believe that the Bible narratives are fairy tales, and for this reason they doesn't trust the teachings of the teachings of the church. It is crucial, therefore, to give an account of the creation of humankind in the image of God, which is coherent with the scientific data. And that is the work we are trying to do with these conferences. An important point is distinguishing between a fuzzy Homo sapiens before the creation of humankind in the image of God and a distinct Homo sapiens after this creation. An important point very often overlooked is this quotation of Pope Pius XII in Humani Generis. God can create intelligent beings without ordering and calling them to the beatific vision. It is what we could say the status of sapiens before sapiens is made by God in the image of God. And that is quite important too. We have to fit the narrative of the flood into the pictures. On September 4th, in the coming September 4th, we will try to discuss different models for that in the creation of humankind and the image of God, and also trying to fit in the picture the flood narrative. And it is all for today. I thank you very much for this most exciting meeting, for attending it, and so we go on, we continue working. And I wish you a very good.
Thank you, Antoine.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you for organizing.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And we keep in touch.